guest speaker this evening, the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Deputy Principal, the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill Campus, Professor Clive Landis, the Honorable Stephen Lashley, Minister of Culture, Sports and Youth, Barbados Government, Dr. Derek Murray, Director, Commission for Pan-African Affairs, Barbados, Mr. David Commission, Director or Chairman, Caribbean Pan-African Network, Major General Ishola Williams, Director of Pan-African Strategic and Policy Research Group, Professor Horace Campbell, Professor of African American Studies and Political Science at Syracuse University, New York, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Dr. Jennifer Obida, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Now, in my community, the community I come from, ordinarily when you have guests or visitors in a homestead, it is usually the head of the homestead who would welcome the guests. Since I'm not the head of this homestead, I will call upon the head of the homestead to do the formal welcome. Please, let's invite Dr. Clive Landis, the Deputy Principal of Cave Hill Campus, to make the welcome address, formal welcome address. Professor Landis.
Thank you, Professor Ochieng. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, the Honourable Stephen Lashley, Minister of Culture, Sports, Youth and Youth of the Barbados Government, Dr. Derek Murray, Director, Commission for Pan-African Affairs of Barbados, Mr. David Commission, Chairman of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, Major General Ishola Williams, Director of the Pan-African Strategic and Policy Research Group, PANAFSTRAG from Nigeria, Professor Horace Campbell, Professor of African American Studies and Political Science at Syracuse University, New York, Professor Serge Kamga, Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute, University of South Africa, Chairman of the Task Force on Reparations, Professor Pedro Welsh, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Jennifer Obida, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and great privilege to bid you good evening and a happy, healthy, and prosperous new year to everyone. It's been a wonderful day on the campus today. Not only this seminal colloquium on Pan-Africanism, but you may have noticed 2,500 secondary school students wandering about our premises on our open day. And I know that your distinguished speaker for tonight, Sir Hilary Beckles, many of you might know he was the principal here for many years. And I know that his heart still resides on this campus. And he would be very happy with both of these great events taking place today. Let me go back to my talk. On behalf of the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Eugene Barito, who is away on travel, and other members of the senior executive management team of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill Campus, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Pan-African Colloquium under the theme Heroes and Heroines of the Back to Africa Movements, Pan-Africanism, African Nationalism, and Global Africanism, their philosophies, activities, and legacies. I wish also to extend a special welcome to participants visiting the beautiful shores of Barbados for the first time. The Cave Hill campus, from its inception, has sought to forge strong ties with the African continent. The bicentenary of the abolition of the British transatlantic slave trade was observed by Africa and its Caribbean diaspora in 2007. To mark this occasion, the Cave Hill campus made the decision to construct a memorial to commemorate Barbados' special link to Africa. It was decided that an African architectural motif would be erected. In the 1660s, when Barbados became a majority African society, most of the Africans had been taken from the area then known as the Gold Coast, present-day Ghana. To honor Barbados' link to Ghana, the new administrative building was designed in the shape of the golden stool of the Asante, a symbol believed to house the spirit of the Asante people. In October 2008, His Majesty Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, Asante Hene, visited the Cave Hill campus and laid the cornerstone for the new administration building, which is now affectionately referred to as the Golden Stool. The Cave Hill campus has made a number of scholarly contributions on Africanism and the African diaspora, and you will be hearing more on those in tonight's feature lecture by our esteemed Vice-Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles. But I do also wish to highlight the significant contribution in health made by the Chronic Disease Research Center at Cave Hill, where I was a past director, to the health and the health disparities experienced by the diaspora populations living in the Caribbean, the USA, and in Africa. In particular, the Barbados Eye Studies represent a remarkable body of work, with over 100 publications that are used to inform eye care in the US for African Americans, and which culminated in the discovery of a new risk gene for glaucoma in the black population of Barbados. The Cave Hill campus is therefore very proud to host the inaugural Pan-African Colloquium, which provides yet another opportunity to strengthen Barbados's and the campus's link to Africa and the African diaspora. The Colloquium is an international conference aimed at bringing together the scholars and activists, researchers and policymakers from around the world to discuss the philosophical, political and economic thoughts, activities and legacies of Africanists, both celebrated and unsung. And I have certainly been impressed by the concept note, which lays out a fearless and open academic discussion on the direction of Pan-Africanism. The contributions of persons like Henry Sylvester Williams, William Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and Kwame Nkrumah have been immortalized in history books. The Colloquium also offers an opportunity to delve more deeply into their work, but to highlight also the contributions of the unsung heroes of the movement. It is hoped that this conference will provide a forum to facilitate the continued growth and development of Pan-Africanism globally. These types of collaborations are especially important at this time when countries in the African diaspora are seeking to forge stronger linkages with the African continent. So in closing, I take this opportunity on behalf of the Cave Hill campus to wish the organizers and the participants who have come from all over the world a successful conference. And to those visiting Barbados, in addition to networking and brainstorming, I hope that your time with us will also be filled with lots of sunshine and opportunities to enjoy our unique Barbadian hospitality. Welcome once again, and thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Principal, for those welcoming remarks. At least now we are open. We can say whatever we want because you've all been welcome now. Now, when we were organizing this conference, we worked closely with several institutions and organizations, amongst them being the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Youth through the Commission of Pan-African Affairs. And that's why we thought it fitting that the Minister for Culture, Youth and Culture, Sports and Youth make some remarks. And I would therefore now call upon Honorable Minister Stephen Lashley to make some remarks. Let's welcome the Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Sahuli Beckles, Vice Chancellor, the University of West Indies, Professor Robert Clive Landis, Deputy Principal of the University of West Indies Cave Hill Campus, Dr. Derek Murray, Director of the Commission for Pan-African Affairs, Mr. David Komisong, Chairman of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, Professor Pedro Welch, Chairman of the Task Force on Reparations here in Barbados, Major General Ashola Williams, Director of the Pan-African Strategic and Policy Research Group, Nigeria, Professor Horace Campbell, Professor of African American Studies and Political Science at Syracuse University, New York, Professor Sergis Kamga, African Leadership Institute, University of South Africa. Other distinguished guests, I hope that I mention everybody, but I want to say how happy I am to be here, to be a part of this particular historic event right here at the Cave Hill campus. It does appear, of course, to me that Cave Hill campus happens to be the seat of many historic occasions, and therefore I believe that we are in the right place at the right time. This year, of course, we will mark 200 years since the Right Excellent General Bussa struck the first blow against the brutality of slavery in Barbados to start a new round of liberation struggles across our Caribbean region. We should also recall 140 years since the 1876 Confederation riots in Barbados. And those of you who are visiting Barbados for the first time in particular, you are doing so in the midst of a year-long celebration of our nation's 50th anniversary of independence from British colonial rule, as we continue, of course, the process in Barbados of emancipation and the struggle for freedom and the struggle for self-determination. So in saying all of that, I'm sure you will understand why then the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Youth, through the Commission for Pan-African Affairs, is tremendously pleased to collaborate with the University of the West Indies. And of course, the Pan-African Strategy and Policy Research Group to welcome here in Barbados leading intellectuals, leading activists, and leading revolutionaries to confront the 21st century challenges that face the Black world and to plan collectively the future of Africans and African descent. But the timing, of course, and the location of this colloquium, I believe, is auspicious for a number of other reasons. This year has other significant landmarks. I'm sure you are well aware that not only has it been 15 years since the Durban Conference Against Racism, where the Barbados delegation boldly confronted and valiantly fought the United States and other powers to keep reparations on the international agenda, and then went further with following up with a well-organized, government-led, Caribbean-wide reparations movement. But that, of course, we also would have pursued another agenda to ensure that this movement can be kept alive. And we would have seen that, of course, as we continue to observe the second year of the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent. I also know that the Rastafari brethren and sisterin in Barbados would also want me to remind you as well that April this year will mark 50 years since His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I visited Barbados and other Caribbean islands. It is therefore clear to me that this inaugural colloquium is not only timely and relevant, but is definitely in the right place. I eagerly look forward to reading and hearing of the foundational insights and the critical strategies, goals, and actions that will be discussed and proposed during what I'm sure is proven to be a short but intense 3 days of work. Race and gender, because they are intimately linked to persistent properties of differences inherent in our bodies, stand out to my mind as two of the most enduring, effective, and socially debilitating inventions. As a nation that shares the common inhuman and criminal experience of the transatlantic trade in Africans, in chattel slavery on plantation societies, and colonialism with other Caribbean nations, Barbados suffered and indeed continues to experience the consequences of that prolonged and virulent form of racism and bondage. But there's yet work to be done. There's work to be completed in addressing some of these impacts, including the empowerment of our people and tackling the vexing issues of identity and self-confidence. As a government, we will continue to play our part in practical ways that address critical issues relating to the current and future well-being of our people, especially our youth. The Commission for Pan-African Affairs in Barbados, its Mabalozi program that designates nursery, primary, secondary, and tertiary educators as ambassadors for Pan-Africanism, continues to ensure that the process of mentally decolonization of our teachers and students throughout the educational system continues. Support for our innovative young entrepreneurs through a very important program called the Social Identity Renewal and Integrated Upliftment Strategy, otherwise known as SIRIUS, reinforces their identity and gives them confidence while providing business resources and advice as well. We will renew our efforts to monitor racial discrimination for reporting to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And finally, in terms of the ministry's commitment, we are focused on promoting exchanges and trade with Africa and the African descendants around the world. I note and indeed welcome the work of our re-energized, focused, and organized civil society, Pan-African organizations across Barbados. The Commission for Pan-African Affairs is indeed given high priority to documenting in the form of a strategic plan and resourcing your work program, and I pledge my ministry's support in this regard. We renew our call for meaningful and innovative reparations globally for people of African descent as past and continuing victims of racial discrimination. I'm happy to report that the Barbados Task Force on Reparations, established under my ministry, is hard at work and is preparing its first major report for submission. It is indeed my belief that the work of this conference in honoring and giving esteem to our ancestors, heroes, and heroines of Pan-Africanism, from Henry Sylvester Williams, William Dubois, Kwame Nkrumah, to Leopold Sédar Senghor, Aimé Césaire, Amilcar Cabral, and Marcus Garvey, synchronizes fully with the philosophy and with the approach of my ministry, which comprehends that the full creativity, the full innovation, and the full empowerment of our people can only be realized if we are self-assured and filled with confidence, both collectively and individually. This approach understands that we can only be confident if we build our self-esteem by reinforcing and celebrating our African identity. I do believe that this is the key to our holistic development and indeed our prosperity as a people. Identity will drive confidence. Confidence will unleash creativity. Creativity to solve our own problems, innovation to build our creative industries from the arts to the sciences, and creativity to construct ourselves, our communities, our nation in our own image. Before I finish, I wish to acknowledge the hard work of the local organizing committee, Professor Frederick Ocean Odehumbo, and I hope I pronounced his name correctly, Dr. Tennyson Joseph, Dr. Sandra Ocean Springer, Dr. Rodney Worrell, Miss Teresasita Cox, Miss Joy Prime. And I do so because organizing conferences such as this is never an easy task. And of course, resources are never readily available. And therefore, on behalf of all who will benefit from this work, I wish to salute your courage, your tenacity, and indeed predict your certain success. The government of Barbados joins with the Afrocentric intellectuals and Pan-African activists in the vision that will see this meeting re-energizing and propelling interests while strengthening the political will of global leaders to bring attention and to bring resources to those governments and civil society programs that are designed to realize the positive dreams and the ambitions of Black people the world over. At this time, of course, all that is left for me to do is to wish you a productive conference. And of course, I make one special request. Do find some time to set a key objective of exploring our beautiful country, even as you intellectualize on a topic of critical and strategic importance to our world. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I think you've sent the message home and dry, in that all work and no play makes Peter or Jack John a dull boy. So, and I think with that in mind, that's why we knew that since before we get to serious business, we need some light entertainment. And I'm informed that in the program now, we have the Israel Lovell Dance Group who will offer us some light entertainment before we continue.
This is the dark time, my love. It is a season of oppression, dark metal, and tears. It is the festival of guns, the carnival of misery. Everywhere the faces of men are strained and anxious.
think that was entertaining. Let's give them another round of applause. Okay, I want to apologize that due to oversight, it wasn't intentional. It was oversight, simple human error, right? That we did not mention Honorable Trevor Prescott, MP. Right, so sorry for that human error. And also I would like thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge Balozi Camelia Alain, who is the coordinator of Mabalozi program. She really worked tirelessly as well. Thank you. Now, I want to invite General Ishola Williams, who is the head of Pan-African Strategic Policy Research Group based in Nigeria, who have actually partnered with us in seeing this colloquium come to fruition. So let's please welcome the General to make some few remarks. General.
Yeah, let me say good evening to everybody. And I'm happy to see Professor Hilary Beckles here, because the last time we met, he was too serious about reparation for me in Johannesburg in South Africa. And he came with a very heavy delegation. And in fact, he succeeded really in making reparation the topic of the Pan-African Congress in Johannesburg. So you need to congratulate him. And also, I was thinking that the commission was going to look older than when I met him in Trinidad and Tobago over 10 years ago. But I don't know what he eats, what he drinks. He must tell me the secret, because I'm looking for older than he is. And I can't find one single white hair in his head. There might be some wonderful things that he's doing. So please let us know. Now, and of course, somebody who has been running around these Pan-African issues and things like that, Dr. David Horn, really. So it's good to meet all these people here today. Let me start normally with all the protocols. In Nigeria, there are too many honorables, excellencies, and distinguished. But all of them are corrupt people, you see. So, and there's nothing distinguished or honorable or excellent about them. Okay. I'm sure it's different in Barbados. So, so let me start with the Honorable Minister. And of course, you see, academics don't worry too much about whether they are honorable or distinguished. They just want to publish or perish. So, Honorable Minister, Deputy Principal, Keynote Speaker, the VC of University of West Indies, all the distinguished professors who are here, the chairman of local organizing committee. I'm happy to be here because it's a dream come true for me and for the group. Being able to do this conference with UWKVille made us to complete the round of University of West Indies, first of all in St. Augustine, and later at the Mona campus, and now in Cave Hill. I don't know whether University of West Indies is going to establish another fourth campus, but I don't know where the money is going to come from. But that is very important, because the role Caribbean has played in the history of Africa needs to be honored all the time. And especially those people of Caribbean descent who were in Europe in the last century and the century before. If Africa is going to ride on the shoulders of anybody, it is those Caribbean descendants. And Africa is sincerely grateful to them. So anytime I come to any Caribbean country, I come with a sense of gratitude. And I believe that we are still not as close as much as we should be. There are too many gaps. We need to fill these gaps. We've been going around these universities, like I've said, with the academics and things like that. We now have to go now to the civil society level. How can we arrange for civil society organizations in the Caribbean and Africa to meet on a regular basis? Without that, we are not building anything people up. We are just talking at the intellectual level. So we need to find a way of doing something along that line. And David Horn will remember that this is something we have discussed so many times. So really, what is a PANAFSTRAG? We are just a group of people who are, that they call them non-for-profit, non-ideological, non-partisan, voluntary group of people who try to critically focus and look out on the gaps and challenges with what is happening in the global African world. And when I mean by global African world, it stretches from where African descendants are, from North Africa to India, where there are the cities of India. And I'm sure Professor Beckles, as Vice President of the Committee of UNESCO, is following that very, very closely. But everybody will agree with me too that there's a big gap there. There have been a lot of concentration on Latin America, United States, Caribbean, and so on and so forth. We've forgotten about those in the Middle East, the Gulf area, and across the Indian Ocean. And even in terms of history, we have not been able to cover that gap. And UNESCO had been impeded in doing some work there because most of the members of the Gulf countries do not like the idea because they believe that it has to do something with Islam. But we are trying to find a way around it. But I've discovered right from 2009 when we went to Libya that the Arabs were not interested in covering that area. So we now say that we Africans, whether the Arabs like it or not, we are going to do it. And whether UNESCO likes it or not, we are going to do it because a big gap. So in Nigeria next year, we are going to organize an African slave trade across the Sahara, across the Red Sea, across the Mediterranean, and across the Indian Ocean. And anybody who's an African descendant in all those areas, we bring them. If they don't come, we drag them. So this is one of the areas of the gaps that we need to fill. The second thing is that AU has created a sixth region. But how dynamic that sixth region is. And that sixth region has not been able to behave like a sixth region. Therefore, there's still a lot of work to be done. But we cannot do it from Africa alone. It has to be done from the diaspora. And one of the interesting things I used to say in some of my travels, and David Horn too is familiar with that, when you go along the Pacific coast, up to Cuba, you find so many people with English names instead of Hispanic names. Where did they come from? Most of them are Caribbean origin, especially Jamaicans. What do we do with them? What do the Caribbean countries do with this set of people? As part of the sixth region, as part of the people that can really come together. And of course also we do have some language barrier, Spanish and Portuguese and so on and so forth, that we need to find a way. Maybe we should start picking, Black Esperanto as a common language, but I don't know when that one is going to happen. So we need to do something about this issue of building and constructing a global Africa. And the second thing which is important to us is this, that the word diaspora doesn't sound nice to us. If we all accept that we're Africans, there are some Africans who are staying in the continent. We are resident there. And there are some who have accepted they are descendants of Africa and Africans too, and part and parcel of Africa. They are non-resident Africans. So if we call ourselves Africans and non-resident Africans, that's a commonality. If you continue to disappear into the diaspora, where are you diasporing and diasporing to? We need to find a word that is not common, that's only relevant to us, that's appropriate to us. So we in PANAFSTRAG group, we don't believe in diaspora anymore. If I see Hilary Beckles, he's a non-resident African. He's an African. He has accepted as an African. If I see if the minister is walking on the street of Lagos, if he doesn't speak, nobody will know that's a Barbadian. Nobody. And when we went to see Derek Murray in his office, I went with two ladies. She thought they were Barbadians, they were not. So what's the difference? I said, when you open your mouth to speak. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are non-resident Africans as from today. The second key area to us as a group is that we believe that development and progress can only be possible if a people and a race has a foundation. So we don't believe in this black world. Not everybody who's a descendant is black, or what do you call it? We say global Africa. If you are global, it doesn't matter what your color is. Do you accept that you're an African? It doesn't matter what your color is. If you do, then you are part and parcel of the global Africa. So if I see you in Brazil, you're a global African, even though you're an Afro-Brazilian. If I see you in Barbados, you're an Afro-Barbadian, but you're also a global African. That's the way we say it. And that's the way we believe we should continue. But what should then happen is that there must be a common denominator. What is that common denominator? First of all, any race that has no foundation based on its own religion, you are missing something. You have no foundation. So we are very keen on how we can revive the African indigenous religion. Very, very keen about that. From that, you build your culture, your philosophy, and come up also as a foundation for your indigenous knowledge systems, which I'm told that Derek Murray likes so much. He did it for a PhD. See, so we need to start looking back at our own indigenous religion as a foundation for everything. And that's why African philosophers are having a problem with what is African philosophy. What's African philosophy? That's the whole problem. And as long as we continue to run away from that, again, we need to thank the diaspora. If not for the diaspora, African indigenous religion could have been dead. So the Brazilians and the Cubans, we thank them so much with their Lukumi, Santeria, Candomblé. We need to thank them so much for keeping those indigenous systems alive. So we need to really do something about that and come back to the authentic religion itself and see how we can use that to build our philosophy culture and the foundation that we require for our own development. It's obvious. The Asians have demonstrated that very clearly. The Asians have demonstrated that. And that's something that we need to go back to. And therefore, this colloquium is so important to us because there's no race without heroes and heroes. None. In every country, they are. But the point which is important to us is that a Nigerian child should know about Marcus Garvey. A Caribbean child should know about Mandela, and so on. But do they? And there are some forgotten heroes too. So we need this sort of colloquium on a sort of regular basis that will bring into light all these set of people. And if somebody like Professor Hilary Beckles, who have been fighting for a long time, or David Commission, who dreams and sleeps about how Africa could be better or global Africa could be better, and he dies at the age of 100 years, the next generation must remember him as a hero of his struggle. That's what we are talking about. That's why this conference is so important. And I'm happy that the Honorable Minister mentioned it, especially on the 50th anniversary of Barbados. It was most appropriate. And therefore, it was something that we, PANAFSTRAG, we are sort of privileged and honored to work with the University of West Indies, Cayville, in co-organizing this particular colloquium. And of course, it is impossible for us to have been able to do it without the support of the Diaspora Commission of your ministry, who came in fully in spite of the short notice, and then gave them all the support they wanted. We are also very grateful to Thabo Mbeki Leadership Institute, who also came in as a partner. But what we are hoping is that we will continue to be able to work with these people in the immediate future. But I need to mention here that there's a young lady who, without her, I couldn't have been standing here today. And that's Dr. Sandra Ocheng Springer. Please stand up. She's a member of PANAFSTRAG, and we had a brainstorming session in Accra in January 2015. And we put across some of these ideas. And when we spoke about these heroes and heroines, said, Barbados is celebrating 50th anniversary. Let me go and try whether we could get Barbados to host it. Initially, he said, oh, difficult to organize conferences. I say, in the military, we say, he who dares wins. So we are going to say, she who dares wins. Hasn't she won? She has won. But that could have not been possible, too, without the support of one gray-haired man who happened to be a professor of philosophy. And one way or the other, I don't know how he managed to be her father. So we managed to get Department of Philosophy and History, which is an appropriate department for this particular colloquium, supported by those in government, sociology, and with Dr. Tennyson Joseph, to come into this. And with other names mentioned by the Minister of Culture, who are also members of the organizing committee. And with all the support that they got, also from university staff, or the various senior management and junior management and other staff of the same level. But I do not want to stop without leaving a challenge, especially for Boso Beckles, the Vice Chancellor of the Regional University. There's something that's very unique about University of West Indies. It is the only regional university in the world, the only one, with only one Vice Chancellor, even though it's a confederation of universities with autonomous principals and pro-chancellors and things like that, all the British grammars, and they call them. But you have one single person as a Vice Chancellor sitting in Mona campus. That is unique in the world, very unique. And therefore, in this challenge that I want to leave, University of West Indies can play an important part. What is the challenge really? And the challenge is that there are two important things that matter to me and to the group that concerns the black people or global Africa, both resident and non-resident Africans. Sustainable development goals. The Sustainable Development Goals. 15 elements of it. And what we discovered with the MDG was that there was no research or a think tank that is backing up the MDG. Jeffrey Cox in Columbia University, advisor to Kofi Annan and later on to Ban Ki-moon, this set up a network of researchers. It did not work for Africa. When will Africa take responsibilities Africans and non-resident Africans take up responsibility for that. In 2013, we went to University of West Indies, and we said that you are in a very good position to create what we can call a Global African Peoples Institute. And that institute will bring together all the black universities in the world, with University of West Indies as the original one to be the focal point. And you can get the best brains in whatever discipline that you want to work within that Global Institute. The plan, the formula, and everything was given to Professor McPherson, who is the principal, and to your former predecessor, whom you replaced. Okay. And I hope you can take this thing up, and that will be one of the legacy you will leave behind. If not, I will tell people to forget about you. The second thing also is that whether we like it or not, the International Decade of Action for the people of African descent has to be successful. That is the greatest challenge to both resident and non-resident Africans. If that decade fails, we should be ashamed of ourselves. We must not allow it to fail. That's why we need that think tank to back it up. And how we can get the resources to make sure that that decade is successful. It is very important. And we need people who can drive that process. Now, the challenge to Barbados. Colloquium is not working. From what you see from outside, Colloquium is not working. You have created an Eastern Caribbean community. But like you have mentioned in your speech, the bottom line today is trade. And the trade between Caribbean had been proposed by Marcus Garvey a long time ago, the triangle. Are we not ashamed that up to today we have not been able to make that triangle work? Somebody had got to drive a process. So in May next year, with Tambumbek Leadership Forum, we are organizing a roundtable on how we can create a trade system, not only within Africa, but what we call global intra-African trade, GIAT. And just try to see where we can bring back that triangle of Marcus Garvey. We cannot continue this way. We cannot. We have to find a way. Now, let me end by just making this statement. We must create our own deserved and revered religious, historical, cultural, and economic space in this world. Nobody has the business of doing it for us in a competitive world. If you cannot compete, the world will leave you behind. I thank you very much. We are very happy to be here. And I don't think anybody has stress in Barbados. Has anybody got stress in Barbados? It's so cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General, for that extended, provocative, and challenging remarks. Now, there are some slight changes on the program in that we were expecting another form of entertainment by the mighty Gabi, but for reasons we don't know, he hasn't come, but we'll move on. And also, Dr. Derek Murray is put down on the program, and it also is was supposed to make some remarks, but he's not going to. So we are going to move straight on to our main event. And of course, I will have to introduce the key speaker. And before I do that, I also want to recognize the ambassador of Cuba, right? Now, there are some things in life which are not easy, are difficult. So one side thing is the introduction I'm supposed to do tonight. It was difficult in the sense that I wanted to be very brief, very, very brief. Though at school I was not good at summary, right? But I tried my best. Because I hope my brief will be brief enough. I tried my best, right? Now, our speaker tonight is the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, and before assuming this office on May 1st, 2015, he served the university as Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of its Cave Hill campus in Barbados here for 13 years, from 2002 to 2015. He has had a distinguished career within the university, becoming, at age 36, its youngest scholar to be promoted to a personal chair. As Professor of Economic and Social History, he won the first Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence in the field of research. He is a distinguished university administrator, a historian of international repute, an expert thinker of finesse, and a strategist in higher education, and some may say learning as well. Sir Hilary has had global recognition for his academic achievement and leadership expertise. He serves on many United Nations committees and advisory panels. He is a founder member of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's Science Advisory Board on Sustainable Development and has been an advisor to UNESCO's City for Peace Global Program. He has also served as an advisor to the UN World Culture Report and is the Vice President of UNESCO's Slave Route Project. He is also an editor of the 9th volume of UNESCO's General History of African series, which he conceptualized around the global African framework. Sir Hilary received his higher education in the United Kingdom and graduated in 1976 with a Bachelor of Arts honors degree in Economic and Social History from Hull University and a PhD from the same university in 1980. He has lectured extensively in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia, and has published over 100 peer-reviewed essays and 14 scholarly books and monographs on subjects ranging from Atlantic and Caribbean history, gender relations in the Caribbean, sport development, and popular culture. Sir Hilary has received numerous awards for his contribution, including the degree of Honorary Doctorate of Letters from Brock University in Canada, the University of Glasgow in Scotland, his alma mater, Hull University in England, and the Kwame Nkrumah University for Science and Technology in Ghana. In 2005, he was honored by the Borough of Brooklyn, New York, for, and I quote, extraordinary achievement, outstanding leadership, and contribution to the community, end quote. He received in the same year, 2015 the second Global Community Healer Award for humanitarian work from the Community Healer Network, Washington, D.C., following the legendary Maya Angelou. Earlier in 2007, he was a Commander Knight of St. Andrew, the higher national honor of his country, Barbados. And I quote, "In recognition of his distinguished service in the fields of education, sports, and arts." Sir Hilary also serves in multiple roles in the Caribbean private sector as well, and is a long-standing director of Sagicor Financial Corporation, which is the largest international financial services conglomerate in the region. He is also a director of British telecom giant Cable and Wireless. He is chairman of the University of the West Indies Press and served as a director of the West Indies Cricket Board, and was a director of West Indies Cricket World Cup Inc. He is founder and director of CLR James for Cricket Research, and was founder director of the Sagicor West Indies Cricket Academy. He is vice president and the Commonwealth Advisory Body of Sport and Development, which advises sport ministers on the planning of the Commonwealth Games. Sir Hilary is chairman of the Caribbean Commission on Reparations and is a member of United Nations Development Programme Advisory Panel of the Caribbean Human Development Report. Finally, Sir Hilary is an accomplished playwright, with 6 of his staged works receiving popular acclaim. Ladies and gentlemen, I want us to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles.
Thank you, Fred. General? Generals love to give orders and instructions to battle. Honorable Minister, distinguished friends, colleagues, delegates, and students, Deputy Principal, and all of my colleagues, thank you so very much for the generosity of your welcome. A few years ago, I used to play cricket with my students here at the Cafel campus, and from time to time they would ask me to bowl the new ball, and I used to wonder whether they were asking me to bowl because of my proficiency or because I was the principal. And I'm not sure here this evening whether I am performing official duties or whether indeed I am welcome to speak about global Africa, as you have heard. The General and I, yes, we had a very intense battle in Johannesburg. I'm surprised he has remembered this. But then again, I'm told that generals have long memories. And I wish to speak, yes, General, about global Africa. And I will give you the background to the journey to the concept. In other words, we have a consensus. And I will speak about how that consensus was arrived at. All of you here this evening, you are the stakeholders of this Pan-African discourse, which is characterized by its diversity of ideas and strategies, perspectives. I will give you my view as a historian on Pan-Africanism, focusing on its utility, its origins and purpose, and critically, its value to moving along the African liberation process. We begin, of course, with the recognition that the Pan-African movement has its origins in the globalization of the crimes committed against the African peoples. And as you have heard, that globalization process was not only confined to the Americas, but also took place across the Sahara, into the Middle East, Northern Africa, Europe, across the Indian Ocean, and into Asia. And you ought not to be surprised by this, because some of you might have heard of the firestorm taking place in Thailand today, resulting from an advertisement appearing on Thai television promoting the selling of skin bleaching products. And it shows a black thigh gradually moving into being a white thigh. And the ad says, if you want to win, you have to whiten your skin. And that is on Thai television, which has created a tremendous discourse. And you should go online and read the conversation taking place in Thailand over this conversation of skin bleaching in relation to that society, which is very similar to what is taking place in Nigeria, in Jamaica, in Haiti, and many other places, South Africa. So yes, Asia is also part of this conversation resulting from this history. But we also know that the concept of building a society on the basis of color coding, the structuring of a social formation along color gradation, that this was not a New World American concept, that this was very much an Asian model. In fact, the Europeans going into Asia, India primarily in the 13th, 14th century, encountered this model for the first time, that it is possible to structure society on the basis of color gradation. That model was transported from Asia, India primarily, across the Atlantic, and became the basis of the American model. The notion of diaspora, I think, has now been effectively destabilized as the geographical space in which a Pan-African vision is emerging. I share the view, General, that its utility has expired, simply because circumstances have overtaken it. The geopolitics, if not the geometry of diaspora, is now questionable. The notion of a motherland and its children scattered, the notion of the structure of a here and a there, of a home and away, that is now problematical in the African struggle. In fact, everyone now has a diaspora. Even the diasporas have diasporas. And it's important, therefore, to see where we are in time. Time has caught up with this concept, and we need to look at it very critically as academics. If you go into South Florida, you will be into the Jamaican diaspora. If you go into Brooklyn, you will go into the Barbadian diaspora, and so on and so forth. So diasporas have spawned diasporas, and those diasporas are spawning diasporas, and so on and so forth. If we go back to the foundation years when Sylvester Williams and William Du Bois were formulating strategies of Pan-Africa, and then, of course, we all know the issues around the practice of Marcus Garvey and the organizational and intellectual work of Padmore and James, all the way through Nkrumah and the Bang Down conferences, and from Bang Down to Barbados. We know that journey. We call that the Holy Grail, the language of liberation through to nation, post-nation, the ISIS discourse. And it's interesting that, yes, we are having this conference in Barbados, very timely. This is the first African majority society in this hemisphere, as you've heard. If you accept the concept of a slave society where the entire social and economic structure and political governance model are formulated on the basis of the use of slave labor, then Barbados was the first slave society in this hemisphere. And as the first slave society and the first majority African society in this hemisphere, Barbados became the model for all of what transpired across this continent. It is much more, therefore, than a diaspora, much more than a diaspora. For some, the demographics, if you look at the demographics, you can say it's a tomb. In that regard, 600,000 Africans were brought to this island. And at the end of slavery, there were 83,000 remaining. So it is also a site of genocide, which we have to examine. But it's more than a diaspora. The word diaspora does not capture the details of what this island is. This island is not just a site of historical memory. This island is indeed the memory, the first fundamental symbol of Africa outside of the continent. And it is not surprising, therefore, that the reference you have heard about the golden stool developed to give King Kofi his stool. 1692, the Ga and Fanti and the Asante people on this island organized to overthrow slavery and to establish Kofi as the king of Barbados, the Asante Hini of this island. And according to the official report, he was to be installed in a ceremony. Well, Kofi now has a stool, and that's the important thing. But that is part of the journey to the Pan-African discourse. Then we can move speedily through Nani of Jamaica and Nani of Barbados, the role of the Nannies in the formulation of the revolutionary Pan-African ethos. And yes, Barbados is celebrating 200 years of the War of General Bassa. But this island has its own peculiar journey. At emancipation in Barbados in 1838, only 1% of the African people on this island were born in Africa. Compared with Jamaica, which was 28%, and Trinidad, 34%. If you take, therefore, a slice across these islands at a given moment, you see a very different set of demographics. From a 1% through to 34%, there are different societies. There are very different societies. And why would we focus on the data? Because it helps to legitimize the politics and the geopolitics of the Pan-African origins. Still problematic, the notion of the mother and the child. The concept of the mother and the child in the philosophical origins of Pan-Africanism situates the migrant exported self as alienated from home, and a politics developing later on in which the diaspora comes to the help of the mother. And this is all insidious in the language of the Pan-African origins, of the belief of Africans around the world that they must go to the rescue of the mother. This, of course, led to all kinds of interest in political theories. It led to the migration of Caribbean peoples into Ethiopia to fight against the Italian invasion. It led to the development of the Rastafari movement and the support of Rastafari, and ultimately leading to Cubans going into Africa to seek the overthrow of the fascist regime known as apartheid. We also know that the diaspora then believed that it was incumbent upon it to help African leaders to fight the battle on the continent, thus the James's narrative that I am going to help Nkrumah because this young man is going to throw the Europeans out of Africa and he needs our help. That language becomes very important in all of the formulations of the Pan-Africanist movement. But it is important always to step back as a historian and look at some of these antecedents. If you look, for example, at what happened in Jamaica in 1738 with Kofi and Cudjoe, they succeeded in pushing back the frontiers of plantation Jamaica, establishing Maroon society in the mountains of Jamaica, creating a perimeter around their freedom, building a perimeter around their liberty, and establishing themselves as a free, independent African community in the mountains of Jamaica, while the Africans are enslaved on the plantations in the valley. It is important to pick up on the significance of these developments because Cudjoe, in signing the treaty with the British, made some interesting choices, and I wish to speak about these choices during the presentation. The treaty which Cudjoe signed with the British in the valley was that we will recognize your slavery system if you recognize our freedom system. The treaty said we will return back to you any Africans who flee the plantations and come up the mountains. We will capture them and bring them back to you. And in return for that, you will allow us to come down the valley, socialize as we wish, and go back up the hill unmolested. And that was a treaty now. So the Maroon community gained its sovereignty, and it gained its sovereignty at the expense of the enslaved in the valleys. The significance of that mid-18th century experience for the 21st century is critical, and I believe we have to stream together all of these moments along the way. Then we have the revolution in Berbice in 1763, in which Kofi and Atta, both Asantes, succeeded in overthrowing the Dutch colony, taking possession of this colony and declaring the first African state in the Americas. Kofi was crowned as Asantehene of Berbice in classical Asantehene fashion, Asante fashion. He was installed and he was crowned the Asantehene of Berbice. Then the reality of the situation kicks in. The Dutch says, well, listen, you have won the war and you have declared an independent African state in the middle of the Guyanas, but it's a big place, so let's make a deal. You can have half of it for your African kingdom, but you need to give us half of it to continue plantation slavery. King Kofi was caught in a predicament, and he called in his military commander, General Atta. And Atta said, we have to fight these Europeans to the bitter end. No compromise, no concession. we have to declare the African Revolution. We do not stop. Kofi said, no, let us compromise, let us split the society into two, give half to the Europeans and we will keep the other half. Let us compromise and split the society into two. The king and his general could not agree, thus resulting in a civil war between King Kofi and General Attah. In the midst of this civil war between the two groups, the British and the Dutch formed an alliance and came in and defeated both of them and re-established slavery in the entire colony. We have to understand the circumstances leading to the reality of pragmatic politics along the Pan-African journey. In fact, about 3 years ago, I was given a lecture in Ghana, maybe a bit longer than 3 years, 5 years ago, in Ghana, on this Asante revolution and the split between Attah and Kofi, and the audience was breaking down in laughter, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I had completely forgotten that the presidential elections were going on in Ghana, and Kofi was the incumbent, and Attah was the challenger. And the master of ceremonies came and says, Professor, Attah and Kofi are at it again. Then we have to look at the Toussaint Louverture movement along this Pan-African journey, where Toussaint secures the liberation of his half of the island and makes a great speech in which he says, how are we going to justify freedom? How are we going to justify freedom on the western half of the island while slavery is going on the eastern half? How are we going to accept this? And so he takes his troops over the mountain, liberates Santo Domingo, and declare the abolition of slavery in all sections of the island. That action by Toussaint Louverture, the Dominican Republic have not forgiven them for that, to this very day, of leading his troops over the mountain into Spanish Santo Domingo to liberate the Africans, to unite the entire island under a freedom regime. Neither have they forgiven Dessalines, who then enshrined in the Constitution the solution to the racial problem in the Americas. The solution to the racial color-coded problem in the Americas, Dessalines wrote into his Constitution of 1805, all Haitians are black. Problem solved. Problem solved. In one constitutional stroke, every inhabitant on the island of Hispaniola was declared black. All Haitians are black, irrespective of your ancestry. And that was his way of turning the world upside down to secure its freedom. These are the Pan-Africanist challenge that we are faced with to this very day. And I will give some examples as I go. The search for new identities continues. Most of us here would have arrived in this part of the world as Igbos and Yorubas and Kissis and Mandingos and Fanti and all of the proliferation of African identities. History has eroded those identities. We are now Barbadians and Jamaicans and Trinidadians and Guyanese and Americans. So we have been reformatted, re-identified, and now we have different identities. And that is the nature of the historical process. Imagine then 500 years from now what we're going to be. But these new identities are constantly evolving and emerging under the pressure of history and the political narrative. We have been detribalized, renamed, re-identified, but all of this speaks to the question of fragmentation, which is the core concept in the Pan-African philosophy. Africa now has 54 states. 54 states now in Africa. Nation states have proliferated across the Caribbean, The world has changed since Sylvester Williams and Du Bois. The pan-trans-Africa world has fundamentally changed in the last 30 to 40 years. Nigeria, which is now the biggest of our nation states, 170 million people, we're celebrating just earlier this year the construction of the largest monument to Jesus Christ in the continent. A 40-ton marble monument, 30 feet tall, built to freedom in Africa. And if you haven't seen it, you should go into Abuja and look at this enormous monument of Jesus Christ overlooking the center of the heartland of Nigeria. This is very significant indeed in terms of understanding where Pan-African philosophy is now going. In our parts of the world here, we have not forgotten the fact that our West Indies cricket team in 1998 on the way to South Africa to play an inaugural test series, the players caught instead a flight to London to demand higher wages, leaving Nelson Mandela in the lurch. He was there to wait for them, to welcome them to Africa in celebration of the Pan-Africanists from the Caribbean who had fought against apartheid, who had stood their ground against apartheid. And our regional cricket team not only snubbed the president, but made it clear that they would not step foot on the Africa land unless there was a significant increase in their player fees. And this, just 20 years after, Viv Richards had said that the criminality of apartheid, and Michael Holden had said, when offered $1 million to play one cricket match, $1 million to play one cricket match, that they would not sell their African birthright for a mess of pottage. But how things have moved on. And what are we to make of the riots in Soweto a few months ago, demanding that the Nigerians be sent home, the Zimbabweans be sent home, the Zaireans be sent home? I happen to have been there in the midst of this emergence of hostility against the notion of foreigners in Southern Africa. And General, I didn't open my mouth, because if I did, and of course they wouldn't have known. But the fact that Soweto should go up in arms demanding the exportation of foreigners who are the African brothers and sisters is in itself a significant development in terms of where the consciousness have shifted. And what are we to make of the Arab Spring within the Pan-African discourse? We all remember that Nkrumah had reached across the Sahara to engage Nasser. And one of the reasons he did that was because he was concerned about the residual colonialism in West Africa and his doubt as to whether the West Africans, who had exported most of the Africans in the slave trade, or that's where it originated from, were still unsure about whether or not they wished to uproot Eurocentric institutions from their societies. And in his judgment, the North Africans were much more determined to decolonize than the West Africans. And he reached across the Sahara to strengthen that bond. We have seen where that conversation has gone all the way into Colonel Gaddafi funding the anti-apartheid struggle, and making resources available for that struggle for 20 years. We have to understand where all of this now. Gaddafi has now been dragged down and executed, and right across North Africa, critical part of Africa, the Pan-African philosophy is still not sure what to make of North Africa, what to make of Islamic and even Christian North Africa that seem much more determined in resisting Western incursion. We have not yet come around. I know that Horace Campbell has thought this through in great detail, and I will leave it to him to give you all of that information. The USA has now finds itself also in a critical situation. More Africans have emigrated to North America in the last 50 years than all the Africans taken as slaves in the previous 300 years. Now, the significance of this for American politics and Pan-Africanism is very important. Just 2 million Africans were imported in slave ships to North America. Over 3.5 million Africans have since migrated to the US in the last 15, 20 years. Now, the significance of this is having its impact because African immigrants today are now one of the fastest growing ethnic groups in American cities. The Republican Party has now targeted the African immigrants, who are projected to outnumber African Americans by 2040. Now, African America, the ancestral base of the Pan-African discourse, the African migrants now projected to outnumber African Americans, especially in the large cities where they are gaining strength as an electoral group. The Democratic Party, as you know, sees the African American vote as its own. The Republican Party has targeted the African vote because they believe from their own research that the Africans are Republicans in their own ideological and philosophical orientations, that they are primarily evangelical Christians, very entrepreneurial, very upwardly mobile professionals, and on the surface of that, they appear to be Republican in every form. And so the Republican Party sees a growing demographic for their base in the African migrant community in the next 10 to 15 years, and already they are identifying leaders to put in positions as mayors, as governors, and so on. What will that do to the relationship between Africans and African Americans as we know them, as we have currently formatted? I'm giving you all of this information to suggest to you that the sociological and historical context of Pan-Africanism have evolved to a level leading us as academics to rethink not only the strategies, but the concepts and the utility of the notion. It is interesting, therefore, that Obama emerges not from the African American strain, but emerges from the African migrant strain. He is an African descendant from the current migrant strain, not traditionally African American slave route journey. That is very significant indeed, and while there is doubt at the moment, while there is doubt in African America about his effectiveness, within the African migrant community, there is no doubt and there is no critique. And that is very interesting from a symbolic. What does it all mean? Then we move across to the UK, and we see also a change in context. Most of you here who would have lived in a British inner city or dwelled there as a student or what have you would have encountered the intimacy of the relationship between the Africans and the Caribbean communities coming together in a social and other context. Pan-Africanism found its root in those inner cities, not only in Manchester where they started, but right across London, Birmingham, Sheffield, all the inner cities. The Africans and the Caribbeans came together in that conversation. But now, the largest single group of Africans in those inner cities are not the West Africans that all of us grew up with, but they are primarily Somalis and Ethiopians. And the Caribbean black community does not know what to do with their neighbors who are from Ethiopia and Somalia and Yemen. The context has changed so fundamentally that the black communities from the Caribbean are moving out of those communities because they do not know how to relate to the Yemen, the Somali, and the Ethiopians, because they don't know what to do, but they're all Africans. So the inner cities, therefore, have found a fractured Pan-Africanism that is having a tremendous social effect upon housing distribution, social life, and so on. As Caribbean folks, we will go down to the Nigerian fete and listen to Fela Ransom Kuti and the High Life. General, we grew up on that. We will go to the Ghanaian fete, and there was that. But now, those people from Yemen and Somalia, we don't quite understand what they're doing. But we are all Africans, and we have to find a way. So that conversation is taking place in the inner city. So North America is changing to some extent. The European cities are changing. And the Pan-African issue is having to come to terms with new formations, new relationships, and new kinds of identities. All of this came to a head at the Durban conference 15 years ago. I will give you my own take on this. David Commerchon is here. He was also there. The Caribbean Africans carried that conversation around reparatory justice in the face of tremendous hostility from a wider world. And each time I speak of this, I have to always congratulate David Commerchon, because he was the one who had to face day and night most of that hostility. We decided to hold the fort on reparatory justice as the center of a global conversation about race, xenophobia, and democracy. We got strong support across what is called diaspora. The Caribbean group, the Brazilian group to some extent, North America. But we got nothing but indifference, criticism, and hostility from the African leaders. Despite tremendous efforts to explain that the African leaders owed us in the diaspora something, and we are now calling in our chit, that we had fought in Southern Africa, Frantz Fanon and the rest of us fought in Algeria. Caribbean intellectuals were all over Africa demanding liberation, that the Caribbean diaspora world delivered on its mandate to the Pan-African struggle and could be found in every African revolution. There was the Caribbean voice, including when Mugabe admitted that in the darkest hours of the Zimbabwean struggle, it was Bob Marley's music that kept them going. We're going to liberate Zimbabwe. And the soldiers would play that music in the bush. They would play that music in the bush. It would re-energize them, get back in there to overthrow the Ian Smith regime. So the debt of gratitude to the diaspora, if using that, was well established from the beginning of the 20th century right through to the end, to the overthrow of apartheid. 100 years of dedicated, concerted Caribbean diaspora involvement in African liberation. And at the moment when we said, okay, now is your turn to stand with us on the reparations, reparatory justice, one by one they backed away. The president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, said to me, he said, Professor, we are concerned with the economic development of Nigeria, and we are not sure we wish to confront the West. In fact, we have a development strategy that does not include diaspora. The president of Ghana, Kufuor, also said to me, he said, we cannot stand with you. We cannot stand with you on this reparations issue because we too have a development strategy that does not include reparatory justice issues, and we are now pushing a strategy called the African Renaissance. And if you read the documents that were in circulation formulating the African Renaissance, that document was nothing more than the World Bank's report for Africa. It was nothing more than a formulation of the World Bank's development strategy for Africa. And so we were caught in a circumstance where the diaspora was saying reparatory justice for the crimes of slavery, the crimes of the slave trade, the perpetual hostility to the African peoples, and the African leaders were saying, no, we are into the Renaissance. It came, of course, to a loggerhead. The leadership could not stand with us. And there was a moment when I used the word betrayal. There was a moment when the word betrayal was used. That we felt betrayed by the African leadership. And we told them so. We told them we felt betrayed. But we were comforted in the fact that in the civil society movement taking place next door, because the Durban conference were two conferences in one, civil society conference, government conference. Next door in the civil society conference, all of the African NGOs, intellectuals, civil societies, the farmers, the priests, the journalists, all stood by us. So who betrayed us? Not African civil society. Your honorables, your many distinguished honorables, those were the ones who sold us down the river. And I said in one session that we were sold into slave ships once and we are sold again here in Durban. But all of the African civil society groups, the trade union groups, the teachers, the priests, the journalists, all the people who represented civil society in Nigeria, in Ghana, and Zimbabwe, all stood with us on reparatory justice. And that was an important lesson to learn, that Pan-Africanism is not about the political leaders of those states. It's about the people. It's about the people. And that was the first lesson we learned. Pan-Africanism has nothing to do with the political leadership of most African countries. It's civil society, the man and the woman on the ground. And I will say something about that before I finish. One of the reasons given by some of the African leaders as to why they could not stand with us on reparatory justice was that they felt exposed and vulnerable to the European propaganda that African leaders had sold their citizens into slavery. And that the Europeans, led by Prime Minister Blair, had argued that if Britain is going to pay reparations, so should the African governments that were our partners. And that the African governments and the leaders allowed themselves to fall into the propaganda trap of European intellectuals and politicians. Despite the fact that the African historians have done all of this incredible research to show that that was not the case. What actually happened in most instances were the hard, pragmatic choices of which I spoke. Kofi, Kudjo. And I hope you see the circle I'm trying to paint here. European military power arrives on the coast of West Africa. Guns and cannons. Guns and cannons. Small African states have never before seen such military might. Not dissimilar from what the Native Americans experienced. They are standing on the hill with their bow and arrows, and the English have arrived with cannons and Gatling guns. And you must remember that in the 18th century, Europe's largest single export to West Africa were guns. So West Africa was militarized, and in much the same way, you see the comparisons between the narcotics trade and the slave trade. These slave trading companies had more resources than any African king could ever imagine. When the British Royal African Company, which was formed in 1672 under the chairmanship of the Duke of York, who became King James II, and all of the stock of that company, owned by the royal family and their aristocrats, the capitalization of that company enabled it to buy all of the state-of-the-art weaponry available in the Western world, arrive in Ghana to get their slaves. Many Africans, many of those kings, fought valiantly and said, no way. All of those African governments that stood in the way of those militarized companies were destroyed. All of them. Every single African kingdom that stood in opposition to the slave trade was destroyed. And we know the history. Some of them tried to be brokers and agents. Some of them made deals, like Kofi made the deal in Jamaica. Respect our freedom in the mountains, and we will send back those who run away and come up the hill. Many of the African kings made the deal. Leave our citizens alone, but we will help you with some of the neighbors. So we will capture some of the neighbors and give you those instead, but you leave ours alone. Some of them made a deal. Well, okay, we will allow you safe passage through our borders on condition you don't take our peoples. You can go up the river and take some of those, and we'll come through our country on the way to the coast. The deal is don't touch ours. All kinds of deals were made. But they were all dealing from a perspective of fundamental military weakness. And we also know from the records of the Royal African Company, the records of the company itself, in which the directors of the company gave instructions to their agents in West Africa to assassinate any African king who stood in the way of negotiations. And we have the records. We have the records of the Royal African Company, where instructions were sent from London to Gorée and also to Cape Coast to assassinate specific African kings, because those African kings were saying, no way. So you want to speak of the age of terrorism? You want to speak about terrorism today, the language of terrorism? I want you to imagine the West African coast in the 17th and 18th century. And even though this research has been done and documented, many of the African leaders were refusing to stand and say, we are not buying that propaganda. If anything, we can present the documents to show that those companies owned by the royal family in Britain were actually given instructions to assassinate African leaders. We have the documentation. It's available. So in Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, the civil society stood in their Pan-African identity, but their leaders rejected Pan-Africanism, even though it was clear to everyone that the heartland of Pan-Africanism in the 21st century will be the reparatory justice movement. How do we proceed from here? We took a first step with the general history of Africa. Most of you would know that UNESCO has funded in the last 20 years this extraordinary 8 huge volumes of African history, the most incredible professional description of African history. But guess what? Unless you were living on the African continent, you were not part of that history. The history of Africa, the 8 volumes, do not recognize Africans anywhere else but on the continent. So all of those millions of Africans scattered across the world are not a part of that project. And so when I was asked by UNESCO to do a review of those 8 volumes with a strategy in mind to formulate what the 9th volume would look like, the first thing to do was to congratulate all of my African colleagues for doing a magnificent work, but to inform them that it is tragically inadequate. It is not a history of Africa. What is now required, and UNESCO was told this, global Africa. Global Africa. A history of global Africa that includes the African peoples in China, in Japan, in Asia, in the Americas, in Europe, wherever they are, a global African volume. And so UNESCO has agreed to abandon the concept and to fund instead the next 3 volumes will be called Global Africa 1, Global Africa 2, and Global Africa 3. Brazil then put up its hand, and Brazil said, well, if that's the vision for the next 15 years of writing African history, the government of Brazil will fund the entire project. And that's what we're doing now. Brazil is now funding the entire project. But the remarkable thing was that our African historical colleagues had actually spent 21 years writing 8 books that excluded the majority of Africans. In other words, when you step, as you step your foot off the coast, as you step in the water, you are no longer an African. That was the assumption of 21 years of African historians assembled year after year. The moment you step off the continent, you are no longer an African. You have stepped outside of your history, and you have stepped into somebody else's history. So the moment that slave ship lost sight of the continent, you were then outside of your history. The choice would be that either you have to go and make a new kind of history, or you have to go and join somebody else's history. And so the question was asked, when the Asantes in Berbice overthrew the Dutch, and because they were Asantes, they organized a ceremony of state. Kofi was crowned in the traditional Asante fashion as the Asantehene of Berbice. Was that African history? Whose history was that? Who were these people? Whose history were they making? They are doing everything in the classical, traditional fashion of Kumasi, but they're not doing it in Kumasi, they're doing it in Berbice. But they're not Asantes anymore, because they're no longer in Asante land. The academics now have in Africa to reinvent themselves as a category. I know of no African historian. I have spent the last 30 years up and down African universities. I know of no African historian who is an expert on Caribbean, Brazilian, American history, because they do not look at it. They are experts on what is in front of them. But the fact that over 30 million of their people have gone across an ocean, those 30 million people have disappeared from their view. All of this now has to be challenged within a new concept, and I'm saying that the Pan-African concept as we have formulated is no longer relevant. I do agree global Africa is a language precisely because the hierarchy is no longer relevant. These societies scattered across the world, inhabited by Africans, led by Africans, Africans reinventing themselves in different parts of the world, these are all legitimate societies with their own value system. And to imagine that the role of these societies is to liberate Africa is a limited vision of what these societies are. These societies will always continue to reinforce the liberation of Africa, but that cannot be its central and primary mandate. These societies have their own legitimacy, they have their own trajectory, and the Africans in these societies must establish their fundamental equality with Africans everywhere, so that the notion that Africans at home are at the center of a conversation and Africans on the outside are on the periphery cannot be accepted. All Africans, irrespective of where they are, must now see their fundamental equality. The politics of this is necessary. And until the African political leadership finds its way to support the global reparatory justice movement, the betrayal will continue to be a fundamental issue. I have met with a very distinguished Nigerian minister who was in Durban when this took place. He came and he embraced me, and he almost cried for what happened at Durban. And we were in Calabar just a few years ago. And he said that one of the concerns that Nigeria faced was the fear of the breakup of the federation. That a reparatory justice discourse might turn inwards upon Nigeria. And one ethnic group might say to the other ethnic group, you participated as brokers and agents of the Europeans, you supported the Dutch, you were part of an alliance to export the rest of us, and the conversation would turn inwards upon the society where each group would end up blaming the other. There is no need for idealism in the world. There is no crime of any global magnitude that has ever been committed without a local collaborator. Every crime, every major crime requires a local participant. And that is why the similarity with the drug trade and the slave trade is so powerful, because the people who bring narcotics into our societies to destroy our children They are right here. Some of us, we participate. If it's coming from the outside, somebody locally has to help it. Someone locally has to help it. But you do not say that the presence of these few people means that the entire nation is a drug trader. We identify the minority and we isolate them because the majority of the people are rising up against it. And so it was with the slave trade. The majority of African peoples fought day after day against the slave trade. In every village across Africa, when you study the social history, the vast majority of African peoples in every village and every town were fighting wars, even against their own leaders, against the slave trade. Many leaders were taken off their throne and killed by their own people because the leader was a participant. The society rose up and removed those leaders. So African political leadership has nothing to worry about. They need to stand their ground, and they need to say that even when there were a few collaborators, that made the crime even more hideous. That a global crime perpetrated by the Europeans was able to use a few locals to carry out their dastardly deeds. That makes the crime more hideous, not less so. And so we have some very hard work to do with the reformatting of all this. Global Africa can be the only paradigm that makes sense of this matrix that has evolved fundamentally in the last 20 to 30 years. It's the only organizing principle that seems to be coherent to bring that level of equality to everyone. So we need a new language. And we need to situate the global reparatory movement within the context of that new language. I believe that if Sylvester Williams and William Du Bois were here today with us in the flesh, that they would say the language of the early 20th century is not appropriate for the early 21st century. It has run the race, and it's time to move on. To build global African solidarity now requires a new conception. To strengthen the African liberation movement and make sense of all of the new permutations in North America, in Europe, and North Africa, to bring all of that into a politic that is realistic and meaningful requires a new conception. African intellectuals, then, all of us who are here, we need to get together very shortly and have a global African summit. We need a global African summit to think this through, to work this through, because there's going to be a lot of work to be done in this very, very long 21st century. We need new tools, new intellectual weapons, new perspectives, and new concepts. I offer you, in all humility, just a historian's perspective. I thank you.
I insist on another round of applause, please. Thank you, Professor Beckles. Now, I think now it's the very right time for another short form of entertainment by Anthony Carter Gabi, Mighty Gabi. I think we are ready for him. He can come in.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to apologize. I was at Lara Court with the had a function. I was told to get here for 9. No, I thought I was late because I think I was to perform before Sir Hillary. But anyway, just want to do a few songs for you. Thank you. For 180 long years, it was pain, bloodshed and tears. 5.5 million across the Atlantic, all of we African. 250 years of slavery, 100 of colonialism. We suffered horror and misery. So I send in this message to England, Great Britain. Reparation, reparation. Tell Britain we want reparation. Reparation, reparation. Tell Britain we want reparation. (1838), they say we free. Queen Victoria said, no, 4 more years you belong to me. They pay the planters 20 million for we as compensation. The figure was short by 27 million pounds. Slave owners demand for we. Britain tell the slave owners, no problem. And for 4 more years, make we work for free. I mean totally, Lord of mercy. Reparation, reparation. Tell Britain we want reparation. Reparation, not compensation. Tell Britain we want reparation. Europe didn't sit on the shelf like Britain. She enriched herself by the enslavement of African people, Indian nation. That is why we want reparation. You understand, you understand. Reparation, reparation. Tell Britain we want reparation. Reparation, reparation. Tell Britain we want reparation. We ain't begging, we demanding. We ain't begging, oh no, we demanding. Reparation, reparation. Tell Britain we want reparation. This next song, simply entitled Riots. I wasn't born, but my grandma tell me how we had riots in this country. Great depression the people did face. So them riot and them burn down the place. I wasn't born, but my grandma tell me how we had riots in this country. Great depression the people did face, so them riot and them burn down the place. Yeah, we had riots in the land, riots in the land, riots in this island. The people and them say they can fight because today is a funny night. It was in 1937. Seems like the land was ruled by Satan, because innocent people police shot in them head. Poor little children get kicked till they're dead. Yeah, we had riots in the land, riots in the land, riots in this island, and the people and them say they can fight because today is a funny night. Lord, yeah. The reason them riot was wide and varied. You can't get no food to feed them babies. You can't get a job if you beg on your knees. Can't get no medicine to cure the disease. And so we had riots in the land, riots in the land, riots in this island, and the people and them, they say they can fight because today is a funny night. The reason I tell you this story is plain, 'cause I believe we gonna riot again. Yeah. If our leaders don't preach what is true and find work for my people to do. Yeah, we'll have riots in the land, riots in the land, riots in this island, and the people and them, they say they can fight because today is a funny night. The people and them, they say they can fight because today is a funny night. Riots in the land, riots in the land, riots in the land, riots in the land. Thank you.
Good evening, one and all. Mr. Chairman, my daddy, Professor Ochieng Odiambo, the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, the Honorable Stephen Lashley, Mr. Professor Prescott, MP, our keynote speaker, Vice Chancellor, University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Deputy Principal, Professor Clive Landis, the Cuban Ambassador, government officials, our most valued guests, and members of the media. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose this vote of thanks on this occasion, and I, on the behalf of the Departments of Government, Sociology and Social Work, and History and Philosophy, would like to extend a very hearty thank you to all of you for being here on this auspicious occasion. Our Vice Chancellor, you will agree, would have given us a very compelling account of the history or the evolution of Pan-Africanism. He spoke of fragmentation and ambivalence of Africans and the grave implications, which include allowing spaces to open for others to exploit us. He also reminded us of the importance of people as agency, but he also spoke of the power of structure. He challenged us to reinvent Pan-Africanism and engage in new conversations of global Africanism, seeing all as equal. The address, I thought, was very thought-provoking and has called us to reassess the old ways of doing business. So the onus is now on us to take up the challenge that he would have raised. I wish to thank all our partners represented here, the PANAFSTRAG, Pan-African Strategic Policy Research Group, the Commission for Pan-African Affairs, the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute, and Pambazuka out of Nairobi, Kenya. We thank all of you for your willingness to work with us, and we hope that we can spread roots deep and wide. We also wish to thank the Israel Lovell Foundation for their creative and energetic energy. It reminds us of our links, and it also gives some power to the art form. We would like to thank Gabi for his masterful and very instructive performance, as usual. I would like to thank Ms. Teresita Cox and other persons in the departmental office who would have worked really hard to bring this event to what it is today. And we'd also like to thank the different departments at UE for their logistics support and cooperation. And this includes the campus bursary, the registrar's office, the educational media services, the campus research awards committee, the security, the campus lecture series committee, the public relations office, the ushers who would have worked today, all the caterers and the vendors, we wish to say thank you. So to all our guests, again, we thank you very much for being with us tonight. This would not have been the same without you, and we wish to ask you to enjoy your stay in Barbados for the rest of the time that you will be here as we engage in productive discourse on Pan-Africanism and what it means going forward for us.
Been down below the